Okay. Looks like we have a few people coming in. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let's see here. I'm just going to turn on the captions. All right, and we'll just wait a few more seconds for some people to show up. Hello, Barbara, Jesse, Susan, or Sue. Some familiar names. All right. Should get a few more people. All right. If people want to go into the chat, just let us know where you're tuning in from. We always like to know. Maybe what brought you here today as well. Or you don't have to say anything. You can just watch us talk. And I'm gonna drop a link in the chat. I have a few windows open here, so just have to check. It's going to drop a link for the book, which you can buy through our museum store. We're selling it at the store. Or if you live close by, you can come visit us. We have plenty of other things in the store. So buy the book and you can buy a few more things. Or you could buy it online and we'll ship it to you. And we'll just go ahead and get started. Hello. I'm sure some of you know who I am, but I'll introduce myself. Well, first of all, thank you for joining us for this virtual program for the Dandy. I'm Omar Acevedo. I'm the literary program coordinator here at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. I am at the museum. I'm in my office. These are not real books, but I do have really beautiful books. They just don't look like this. Um, Virtual programs like this are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are grateful to honor his memory with these programs. And I want to say a quick thank you to our members. If you're not a member, please consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. You can do so by visiting our website or reaching out to me, and I'll get you to the right folks. And during this event, we encourage you to have a conversation with each other in the chat. If you have a specific question, though, please post that directly into the Q&A section. It's down at the bottom, sort of in the center with all the other icons. It has a talk icon with a question mark in it. So just click there, put your question in, and we'll get to those questions later on in the program. Our guest author today is Peter K. Andersson. He is a historian and writer with a PhD in history from Lund University in Sweden. He has been a visiting scholar at the universities of London, Oxford, and Bologna, and has written extensively on Victorian cultural history, urban history, and popular culture. His previous books include Street Life in Late Victorian London and Fool in Search of Henry VIII's Closest Man, and has contributed to periodicals such as the TLS, History Today, and Journal of Victorian Culture. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. So just to start us off, could you tell us what the dandy A People's History is about in your own words? What drew you personally to this subject, and why did you feel now was the right moment to write A People's History of the Dandy?
Yes, well, I think any moment is the right moment to write a
Yes.
people's history of the dandy, and I really felt that it was a book that needed to be written because we have a common notion of the dandy, don't we? We have a common definition of the dandy, and it's quite a upper middle class aristocratic notion, quite literary.
Mhm.
We tend to associate it with famous men, Beau, Brummell, Oscar Wilde, Charles Baudelaire, and so on. So I wanted to change that because during my previous research in Victorian cultural history and urban life and so on, I've come across all these different dandy cultures, not just in England, but all over Europe and in America as well. And they had different names. They weren't always called dandies, they were called swells or dudes or whatever. Um, and so started to notice that this is something that occurs quite continuously throughout modern history, especially in cities, of course. Um, but no one has really written a sort of comprehensive book about it. And some of these subcultures that I write about in the book haven't really been studied at all. So I felt there was a need to sum all this up and also to sort of turn the notion of the dandy on its head by showing that dandies weren't just famous writers or artists or celebrities, but they were often men from the lower stratus of society, perhaps not the most manual laboring classes exactly, but the white collar workers, the domestic servants, the apprentices, shop assistants, and so on. And so this is the sort of section of society that is quite important in modern history, of course, especially in Western modern history. So this is a part of their cultural history that I felt needed to be written. And of course,
Yeah.
I had a sort of personal connection with dandyism as well, as I detail in especially in the beginning of the book, because I felt when I was growing up, I felt different, I felt apart, I was an outsider, and I had a sort of urge to communicate this in some way. And my quite strange way of communicating this in the small town in Sweden where I grew up was to dress like a dandy or like a sort of English gentleman of the old period. And this, of course, yeah, it raised some eyebrows, but still, it was my thing. I didn't have anyone else doing it at the time, but the men that I write about in the book were quite often part of a group, of course. So that's the difference between me and them. I was alone, and they were not.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about that before we came on screen about how I felt a very similar that we're kindred spirits in that way. I didn't dress as a English gentleman at that time. I do a little bit more now, and it's the thing that people know me for. People will say, "Wow, you're really dressed up. You dress up so well," and I'm like, "This is normal for me."
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's quite a fun thing because people say that to me nowadays as well, and they sort of, oh, you're wearing a tie today. It's just Tuesday, and I think that's also a bit a part of the whole thing. You just a normal day can be a special day if
Yeah.
you want to sort of dress like that. So
Yeah,
it's a way of
exactly.
making everyday life a bit more fun. I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you said that dandies often came from working or lower middle class backgrounds where
Yeah.
identity was a little bit fluid or was allowed to be a little bit more fluid than in the upper echelons of society. Why did dandyism appeal especially to those groups? How did what they wore serve as a tool for social mobility or self-invention?
Yeah, I think self-invention primarily, and maybe also social mobility, but social mobility was mainly something that other people accused them of doing
Yeah.
or of trying to do. So I think it was more about themselves, and I think you could sum it up in two aspects really. One, um, distinction, trying to sort of distinguish themselves and trying to get noticed in the urban sort of atmosphere in places in entertainment venues, pubs, whatever. You wanted to catch people's eyes, especially perhaps members of the opposite sex. So that's of course one very natural thing about all this. This is very much about young men trying to get noticed and trying to distinguish themselves, which is, of course, a very sort of broad, general phenomena.
Yeah.
But I think also, and perhaps even more importantly, which sort of ties into to what we spoke about, the sort of reaction against monotony or a sort of battle against boredom or the tedium of daily life. So trying to make their quite often quite simple lot in life into something a bit more exciting, a bit more colorful, you might say.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of these dandy subcultures that I write about, they dressed very colorfully. They dressed in bright colors quite often. They were flamboyant. Some would say that they were vulgar. They were, of course, very
Yeah.
often accused of being vulgar.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that's very natural, and it's quite a shame that very often the images we have of these men are in black and white. Not all of them, of
Yeah.
course, but quite often. So we can't really see. We have the verbal descriptions of the way they dressed, but not
Hmm.
always do we have the visual um, impressions.
Yeah, it's always really interesting to see a movie or a TV show that has these sorts of characters, and then we can really have a good idea if they do it historically accurate, which they don't always do.
Mm.
But if they do, we have a good
Yeah,
idea
yeah.
of of a three-dimensional person.
I think there might be a tendency now that you mention it in movies and TV series nowadays when the 19th century is being portrayed of showing it in a very dark light. The colors are
Hmm.
very subdued. It's very sort of brown, gray, black. You have a sort of emphasis on the smoke and the industrial environment and so on. And
Yeah.
I think that's a sort of aesthetic that is common nowadays. And of course it has its function to set the tone. But sometimes you can miss the colors
Hmm. Hmm.
in the Victorian period or the 19th century generally, because I think dress and a lot of things were much more colorful than we tend to see.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to go online, go on to the various museums websites, but I think the V&A probably
Mm.
has the most interesting costume collection. Look up an 1820s 30s waistcoat and you'll see how colorful they were.
Oh yes, yes.
Now, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned because there was a lot of perception, a lot of negative perception towards dandies. And of course there were different names for them over different decades and different
Mm.
generations. Can you tell us, this is another two-part question. Can you tell us who those or what those various iterations of dandies were, and why did that particular or societies, 19th century society, often react so negatively towards them?
Yeah, I think, well, as you see from my book, it has quite a lot of chapters, and that is because there's quite a lot of these dandy subcultures
Yes.
when you look into it, especially in the 19th century. And I was very reluctant to skip any one of them. So I really try to write about them all, really. Um, and it's I sometimes think, what's my favorite of all of these, because they have their own way of dressing. They all have a special accessory that was associated with them that people derided or mocked, and so on. But they're very funny, all of them. um, there is a notion, of course, that dandyism begins in England
Hmm.
or in British culture with Beau Brummell in the 1810s, the Regency period.
Hmm.
And that's not untrue, but I think similar things are starting to happen around the same time on the continent, especially in Paris. So even though I begin in London in the first chapter, the next chapter is about Paris in the same period, where you have young men that were known as calicos. So that was the denomination of the Parisian dandies in the sort of 1820s thereabouts.
Hmm.
Um, and I think your question about why people reacted to them, that's the sort of main thing that you find over and over again about these young men throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th century, is the very harsh reactions, the mockery, the satirical cartoons, of course, which is good that we have them, because in some cases that's the only documentation we have of how they looked. Um, but there were very harsh reactions, and I think that was about Of course, social mobility, social insecurity. This was a category of men that was sort of unaccounted for, both economically and politically. What were they? Were they conservative? Were they reactionaries, or were they revolutionaries, and so on? That was an insecurity. And I think also there is a sense of generational opposition going on here. It was very
Mhm.
often older people reacting against the folly of the youths, and of course that's something we can recognize. One aspect of this that was particularly relevant in the 19th century was that these dandy cultures often cropped up in periods of peace in England or France, and so older people thought that these were young men who didn't have a war to fight. They were
Mhm.
stay-at-homes, so to say. So they became effeminate. They became weak, passive, everything that a man shouldn't be, according to the ideals in those times. So the reactions were harsh, of course, and so there is very much a military dimension going on here. Um, and of course, a lot of these early dandy subcultures, the Regency dandies and the calicos, they adopted fashions that originated among the military, actually.
Yeah,
Um,
I
one
found
one
that
of
very
my
interesting.
Yeah, exactly, and one of my favorite thing about the original dandy subculture of the 1810s is that they wore false moustaches, which sounds very strange, but that was a fad for a short period, and that was because moustaches were um, very popular among the hussars, a
Hmm.
certain military regiment that was allowed to wear moustaches. But these young men, they couldn't always grow a moustache, so there was a fashion in false moustaches. So
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of these strange fashions, really, but they all have their story to tell.
That's so interesting. I would have been fine. I was able to grow a mustache
Yeah.
very early, so
Oh yes, very impressively so, I must say. Yes.
but yeah, I found that quite fascinating. I'm not a scholar, but I do love 19th century history and literature very much. And that's something I never had any concept of how much military fashion influenced
Mm,
the dandies of that time. And military fashion has often influenced culture. I mean, definitely World War II immensely uh, changed
mm.
fashion in all of the Western world.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that was really interesting. You said something about these men being effeminate, and there were are perhaps stereotypes of dandies being effeminate
Mm,
and queer, gay, homosexual.
yeah.
Um, but also they were also seen in the 19th century as hypersexual womanizers.
Yes.
How do we understand these contradictory images? What do they
Yeah.
tell us about these anxieties over male sexuality and style?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly it. It's a sort of anxiety about male sexuality. And of course, both of these notions are true. There were dandies that were homosexuals. Quite often they're sort of um, they had places where they congregated or
Yeah.
socialized, and sometimes they were raided by the police, and it became a
Hmm.
big scandal in the news and so on, and everyone mocked their dandies.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
very very sad story, really.
Yeah.
But then we also have these dandy types that were viewed as very, yeah, womanizers. Their sort of main goal was all about um, ogling young women on variety stages, or visiting prostitutes, and so on. So you have very much a contradiction, and this goes on into the 20th century, where you have both the emergence of maybe a more widespread homosexual gay culture, and dandy cultures that are very rugged and masculine. You have the zoot
Mhm.
suits, but you also have dandy cultures that are associated with the sort of gang cultures, mafia,
Mhm.
semi-criminality, and so on.
Mhm.
And that's something very different, of course, which a world that has a completely different ideal. So the contradiction is very difficult to understand. But I think maybe, at least if you go back to the 19th century, the sort of uh, masculine dandyism which was growing in the late 19th century is a sort of reaction to the homosexual connotations of earlier dandyism.
Mhm.
It's also a sign of a general um, development in Victorian society, not least, where this sort of muscular Christianity and and so on becomes very much an ideal in popular culture. So I think there is some underlying general thing here,
Mhm.
and I think that's also what is very interesting about dandyism, because it continuously plays with this contradiction there, and it sort of it belongs to both sides really. There is
Mhm.
a continuous association with gay culture. There is a continuous association with mobsters and so
Mhm.
on. So yeah, it's a sort of to and fro all the time here.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
and it still exists based on my Instagram algorithm and the people that I follow who are all, I mean,
yeah,
not all the people that I follow on Instagram, but a big chunk of the things that I follow are men who are interested in style and fashion.
mm-hmm.
And they come in those two different
Yeah,
tastes or brands.
yeah,
Yeah, the elegant masculine man's man and
mm,
the
mm,
and the queer person who maybe sometimes plays around with having some women's and men's dress combined.
yeah,
And it's really fascinating
yeah.
how those communities persist.
Yeah, I think if you go into the sort of 20th century, the late 20th century and the 21st century, the scales have changed a bit, and there's the there is a working class ideal nowadays, and has been for the past 60, 70 years maybe, from the post-war period up until now, where masculine fashion and masculine style is very much, it's meant to be very sort of rugged and a bit you dress down, you dress maybe in more rough clothes, jeans and so on.
Mhm.
But whereas if you go further back, there was still a male ideal that was very much influenced by something else, by the upper class ideal.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, this was a period when Fred Astaire was a sex symbol, or what have you. I mean, it's almost unthinkable today to think about, um, early Hollywood stars, and think that
Mhm.
they were male sort of ideals among women. So something has definitely changed.
Yeah, yeah. Now, in just I'd like to take a little tour to my side of the ocean,
Yeah,
um, and and sort of talk about, well, you do cover quite a number. This is not just a Eurocentric European male-centric book.
no,
So you do go into dandies in the US, specifically focusing on Black American dandies.
yeah.
Um, so how did dandyism emerge in Black American communities in the generation after emancipation, particularly?
Yeah,
And how did these Black dandies create their own fashion traditions, and how were they perceived by the wider white society?
I think that's the black dandyism is really the in my view the main contribution that the United States make to the international history of dandyism here,
Yeah.
even though there are uh, other things as well. But it is unavoidable to cross the Atlantic when you look at this story of popular dandyism, because it is very widespread, especially among the black communities in the 19th century. And of course, it's logical to start in Europe because that's where
Mhm.
most of it begins, and then
Yep.
it spreads across the globe. But the black dandyism is, of course, it's been written about quite a lot, but from
Mhm.
a more of a literary point of view, the perceptions of the black dandies, famous black dandies, and so on. I wanted to find the the poor black men, the freed slaves, who actually dressed in a dandy fashion in the streets and aroused a lot of reactions. So where do you find them? They didn't write anything. They are quite invisible. You have to find them in newspaper clippings
Mhm.
from all across the United States, really, and you find quite a lot of newspaper items about uh, young black men who cause a stir on the street. They maybe they sit in the wrong train compartment. Um, they, um, they create a havoc with their clothes, really. And this occurs all through the 19th century, really.
Yeah.
Um, Other people, other historians who have studied Black dandyism claim that it begins already in the 18th century, and that it begins as this racist stereotype about um, the the black servant or the black slave who has a sort of inclination to dress in a flamboyant way, and it's a very derogatory view
Mhm.
that becomes a very common cliche, and it's eventually, of course, taken up by the genre of blackface minstrelsy, which is one of the big popular entertainment cultures
Mhm.
in the US in the 19th century. And
Yeah.
I think also, ironically, it might originate in the racist stereotype, but it is also adopted by these black men as a sort of parody of the parody, you might say.
Mhm.
They sort of assume it, and they make their own thing of it, and it is a sort of um, yeah, it is a sort of rebellion against this by adopting it, really. But the origins of it are quite unclear, but what is certain is that it was very widespread, and I think also that black dandies in the 19th century, they developed their own styles,
Mhm.
which they had, which was spread in their own communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's actually an exhibition still open for the next 3 weeks. I just checked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City about
Right.
black dandies.
Mm.
So if out there in the audience, if you could make it to New York City in the next few weeks, I think it closes on October 6th. And I saw it a few months ago. It was excellent. It was also packed, but the Metropolitan Museum of Art usually is. Yeah, there's some stories in your book where um the black dandies would just sit wherever and like in a on a train and I was scared for them, but they just did it.
Mm. A
So
lot of yeah, a
yeah.
lot of things, and a lot of provocative things that they
Yeah.
do very courageously, really,
Hmm.
and a lot of situations that seem to have been a bit Rosa Parks ish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Streetcars, sitting in streetcars in the wrong section, wearing very flamboyant clothes and so on. Yeah,
Hmm. 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 Yeah. It's it's a very interesting part, and I do want to put in a little, Mark Twain in it since we're in America in the
of
19th
course.
century in our point of our conversation. But certainly Mark Twain had his moments of dandyism. His wife ha sometimes had to tell him that he had to dress better than he was dressing. He forgot his cravat one time when he was visiting Harriet Beecher Stowe across the lawn here. And there's a whole story behind it. Um, but um, but he certainly had his moments where, for example, he wore a completely sealskin coat, which was unusual for men to wear sealskin, which was usually wi in women's clothing. So he had his little dandy moment there, and of course the famous white suit. Um, he said that he actually hated black, and that which was, a very omnipresent color in men's clothing. I mean, even today, most men's, when you go to buy, clothes, it'll be black, blue, gray. So it's hard to find something that's yellow, orange.
Mm, mm,
He wanted to do this white suit thing for a while. So he finally did it when he went to Congress, um, and to appeal for more stringent copyright laws here in the United States. And then at the closer to the end of his life, he received an honorary degree from Oxford and received his Oxford robes, and he would just wear them whenever he felt like it. So there, Mark Twain himself also had his moments of dandyism.
mm,
Um, as many people, black, white, etc., in the U.S. have had
mm,
in the U.S. But that's a little also a little segue to get to move a little bit like f faster in time to the zoot suit. Now, the zoot suits, that's and you say it yourself in the book, it is like the most researched dandy subculture.
yes, yeah.
Um, why is it so heavily studied? What made it such a big thing for scholars and for people, the mainstream public?
Yeah, I don't know, but I think there are a few factors. I mean, of course, it has its golden age in a very tumultuous period in history. It's in the middle of the Second World War, and it becomes this sort of um, uh, symbol of something other than the war effort, and people react towards it because it seems like you're being very what's the word,
Like
uh, wa-
disrespectful?
wasteful of
Yeah, wasteful.
fabric in a time when you have to be very economical,
Hmm.
disrespectful, of course, and yeah, a sort of provocative indifference, really. Or that's the way it's viewed by those who react to it, and it becomes the allegedly the cause of the so-called Zoot Suit riots, which happen across the United States. So I think this quite violent and of course politically charged aspect is a key reason for why it has been so well studied, because in a way it sort of summarizes and illustrates something else. And that's you might say it's a bit of a shame, because there are other dandy subcultures that weren't as politically charged, or at least not overtly so, and that didn't cause riots or other politically charged events, but were also very important. So it might be a bit of a coincidence there that the Zoot Suits are so well studied. But on the other hand, when you look at the Zoot Suits, I mean, you become sort of hooked right away, and it is very fascinating. And this very outrageous fashion, um, it's very interesting. But I think my take on it, or my way of sort of contributing to the study of the Zoot Suit, is to look at it globally, or at least as global as it became. It didn't spread all over the world, as far as I know, but it did crop up in various iterations in South Africa, in Asia, in Russia, Eastern Europe,
Yeah.
Scandinavia, where I come from. So it's very interesting to see how it had its different reincarnations in different countries, and it wasn't called zoot suits wherever you went. It had
Hmm.
different names in the different countries, and slight variations in what type of subculture it was, who indulged in it, and what, of course, the symbolic value of it was. But since it was the time of the Second World War, it was very much that context that led people to interpret it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was fascinating to see how much it had spread around the world
Uh-huh.
and even to places like the Soviet Union, which you wouldn't think,
Yes.
would have something like that.
Mm.
And um, I also find it fascinating the connection to modern to contemporary culture, contemporary fashion, that sort
Mm.
of very wide, big clothes
Mm.
has made has come back or it comes back every so often.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
90s things were a little bit bigger and baggier,
yeah,
and now we're sort of back in that bigger,
yeah,
baggier
yeah. It's the
trend.
1980s with the shoulder pads, and yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, there
yeah.
is something there.
Yeah, I was laughing at I should hold up the book so everyone can see the book.
Oh, yes.
There it is. I was
I
laughing
have it as
because
well.
yes. There was an illustration where someone was talking about the changes, and this is back in the 19th century, between the dandy of the 1840s and the dandy of the I think 1890s, and how
Yes.
the fashions in one period were very slim, and the fashions of many years later were very big and baggy.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see it there.
Yes, yeah, that's
Yeah,
the one.
the
Yeah.
left one there,
Yeah.
with the different silhouettes. Yes.
It makes me think of my own I don't wear trendy clothes, but I have my own style. But it makes me think of my own opinions like, oh, I hate these big baggy clothes. I remember in my day, 10, 15 years ago, skinny jeans and tighter clothes
Yeah,
were more of the
yeah,
trend. But
yeah.
this is just history. It just all these
Yeah,
patterns, repeating themselves.
it's fashions, and of course
Yeah.
this is what happens. You have one decade when the slim silhouette is fashionable, and then 10 years later it's the broad silhouette, and of course you can see this going back and forth all the time, really.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that image, because the 1890s masher, what in Sweden was called the grill Johnny, because
Hmm.
they were associated with grill restaurants. Grilling food
Yes.
was a big new thing in Stockholm in the 1890s. Um, and the fashion in the 1890s, that was also quite outrageous, even more outrageous, I should say, than the zoot suits, because you had to wear a bowler hat that was too small, you had to wear a monocle, you had to wear a big bow tie, and then you had to have a short jacket and very wide plaid trousers, extremely wide, that was supposed to
Hmm.
be folded up to show the socks, and then you had yellow pointed shoes. So
Yeah.
everything was quite outrageous, almost a bit clownish, really.
Hmm.
So I would love to have seen that um, coming back. Yes,
Yeah.
very
And you
much.
do mention in the book that that may have inspired the idea of or the look of a circus clown.
Yes, yes. I think I haven't really proved it, but the circus clown, as it looked in the modern period, really emerges in the same time. And there are famous circus clowns in the 1890s that begin by doing a parody of these dandies. So yeah, it's quite possible that they contributed to the history of the clown as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I just want to encourage people to please ask questions, put your questions into the chat or comments. We can use that to continue our conversation. And yeah, I'm down to my last few questions. So if other people have questions, please go ahead and ask them. Um, let's move a little bit more into like living memory. So now, in the mid 20th century, we see a succession of youth subcultures. We see the
Mm,
teddy boys, the mods, and then the new romantics, which I think someone mentioned in the chat. Um,
mm.
how do you see these movements as part of the dandy tradition? Were they directly connected to earlier dandies, or are they something different?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of both, really, because I think you can see from the post-war period, at least onwards, there is a sort of what you might call a postmodernism going into it, because they start to become comments on or quotations of earlier dandyism. So the teddy boys, they're named after Edwardian men, teddy boys. So it
Hmm.
becomes a way of adopting or resurrecting old fashions and looking back to old dandy periods. And that's what you might say is continuous about all these the mods and especially the new romantics, which were also quite outrageous and extreme and even in some forms resurrected even 18th century or Regency fashions. It was quite an eclectic style, of course, but still. Maybe that's one thing that differentiates these later subcultures from the earlier ones. But I think also they are similar because they were very local cultures. At least the teddy boys. I don't know if there were teddy boys in the States.
Mm.
Um, might have been.
Yeah, I'm not
But
sure.
no, but it seems to have been very local to working class areas in England. The mods, that was really the first global subculture that was dandyist in a way, because there was a new media landscape that allowed these styles to spread more rapidly.
Hmm.
But the new romantics, even though there was this media landscape, and even though it was heavily mediated, I think was also very much a localized subculture to England and certain cities. But that's something that's different now. I don't think you could. I mean, there might be subcultures cropping up here and there that are very local and that are very sort of they have their members in a certain area of a certain city. But I think that's unusual. And I think
Yeah.
when we talk about subcultures nowadays, it is a subculture that has its members in Japan or Mexico or Brazil or Denmark. So it's more connected by I mean the internet, of course.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, there's a slow change going on in the late 20th century, but you can still see this what I claim is a sort of continuous stream of dandy subcultures up until the New Romantics, at least. After that, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When reading about those middle of the 20th century subcultures, I kept thinking, wow, these are really interesting. Funnily enough, I didn't really know too much about the Teddy Boys, even though maybe they're one stylistically what I probably
Yeah.
would connect with more. Although when I was reading what you were detailing about their escapades, I thought, no, maybe not. I've always been the good one, the teacher's pet. So I'm not
Mm.
gonna get myself into trouble. Like now, as a as an almost 40-year-old, yes, I will get myself into trouble, but not not as a 15-year-old.
Yes, yes, yeah. I feel the same way. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, with the new romantics, lots of people will
Mm,
remember that.
mm,
It being not too far away
mm.
from our cultural memory.
Yeah.
And that's a completely different sort of style, where you said,
Mm,
18th century and frills and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think the new romantics they are quite similar to the mods in the 60s because it begins as a quite a local subculture which has its
Hmm.
own more outrageous style, and then it becomes more commercialized and it goes into mainstream fashion. So
Mhm.
it influences quite a lot, but it sort of changes from being what you might call a subculture to something
Yeah.
more broad.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't think you can really we haven't really had a dandy subculture since the New Romantics necessarily. Well, we can
No.
talk about the hipsters. There, you wrote something that I thought was so funny. Where I literally laughed out loud, where it was like, the hipsters think that they're, being, rebellious, but they're not really because it's like based on middle class stuff and fitting
Yeah,
in.
yeah. Yeah,
I thought,
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because my claim is that there hasn't really been that kind of dandy subculture since the New
yeah.
Romantics. Other people might disagree, and I would love to hear from them. But I think the hipster is interesting because it, a lot of the reactions towards hipsterism are very similar to the 19th century reactions towards dandyism, and especially this sort of bashing that is quite the hipster becomes a sort of open target in the beginning of the 21st century, and that's interesting because the hipster is also a socially mobile, an individual that is sort of unaccounted for socially and categorically. But still, and also, you know, there might be something that connects the hipster with the dandy, and that might be that he might be a peacock, someone who just wants attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is something
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it makes me think, going back to what I mentioned earlier about the things that I engage with in social media. And this is a reflection of many, many things, that we see on the news, about how fractured things are. And, even with people who might have been dandies, people who, dress up sort of maybe a little bit nicer than I do, but in its sort of vein. There are
Not
so many
possible.
there's so many different kinds. There's so many there
Yes. Yeah.
people will send me particular influencers who dress up in an 18th century style, and they're like, "Here, I think you'll like this." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't really like 18th century stuff though." So good for him,
Mm.
but I'm not interested in that particular
Yes. Yes.
style.
No.
So, maybe that's why we haven't really seen this dandy um
Mm.
subculture. I hope one will start and have an as interesting a name as Masher, Dude, Gent, Swell.
Yes.
Because all
Exactly.
those
Yeah.
names are awesome.
Yes, it would be fun, of course. But yeah, I think it's difficult because, as you say, things are much more fractured now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. Okay, so let's get into some
Yes.
audience questions. Um, let's see. My friend Jesse here, just an observation, the Zoot Suit riots of 1943 in Los Angeles seem to parallel the backlash to black dandies in the 19th century. I think that's a fair
Yes. Yes.
assessment
That's
to say.
true.
Yeah.
The Zoot Suit riots seem to have been more of a sort of coherent thing that spread across the country, but but yeah, definitely in the 19th century, of course, there were lynchings and assaults of black dandies. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Lisa has a couple questions. Her first question is, have you done an analysis that compares times of economic prosperity or austerity in comparison to the changes in dandy silhouettes? Studying some ladies' fashions, an example of the lean silhouettes of the 30s and 40s were directly impacted by wartime fabric rationing. Yes, I've thought about this
Yeah.
a lot.
Yes, that's interesting. And of
Hmm.
course, you could make something much more systematic than I've done in this book, really, by connecting it with the economic changes. I haven't done it overtly. I think now and then I connect it with those things. But yeah, I'm not sure you can really see um, see the associations all the time, but of course some of
Hmm.
the times it's and I should say also that we didn't get into it, but there are women in this book as well.
Of
There
course,
have been
yes.
female dandies.
Hmm.
There have been subcultures, female dandy subcultures that I also go into.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The definitely the 1920s and 30s.
yes,
Women, lesbians, transgender men who were in Paris and Berlin, and I'm sure many other cities,
yes,
who were the dandies of that particular time period.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Lisa also asks, would you consider modern hip hop culture dress a form of modern dandyism?
I think there are quite a few people who have uh, called it a form of dandyism, and they might be correct. I try to, for the sake of clarity in the book, I try to have quite a slim definition of dandyism. And
Hmm.
what I do is I try to pinpoint subcultures that, in various ways, use the male suit as the sort of basis for their fashions.
Hmm.
And of course, there are famous hip hoppers who have worn, flamboyant suits and so on in ways that are very quite similar to the African dandyisms of the late 20th century. But yeah, I wouldn't consider it a sort of dandy subculture quite like that. I mean, I think the style and the fashions of hip hop culture, um, to begin with, is something quite different from
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
subcultures.
And in the US we have like the US football players who as of late in the last, I don't know, several years have started to dress up, when obviously when they're
Yes,
not playing
yeah.
in these particular styles that could I wouldn't say dandy. Maybe most people would say dandy. But tailored suits and very
Yeah,
fashion forward sort of
yeah.
clothes. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, I mean, the word dandy is something that is used very broadly nowadays
Yes.
of any man who dresses in a specific way or in a distinct
Hmm.
way. And you could use it like that, but I try to be more coherent for the sake of
Yeah.
clarity. Yeah.
Where Jamil actually asks, aside from fashion, what are the
Mm.
other elements that characterize dandyism? There's quite a few, I think, right?
Absolutely, but quite difficult to sum up. Really, I mean, the normal or the common definition of dandyism um, has it as a sort of a more of a philosophical outlook on life. It's
Hmm.
about a more blasé view on life, um, indifference or nihilism, you might say. Um, and there is a bit of that in the popular dandyism that I write about as well. But I think also a sort of self-conscious parody, self-conscious flamboyance, and also a sort of I mean, not really rebelliousness. I can't claim that these different subcultures are revolutionary or that they they sort of want to um, tear down society in any way, but they have a different. It's a sort of provocation, and it's definitely a youth culture.
Yeah.
It's something about being a young man mostly,
Hmm.
and being in that strange period in life between childhood and adulthood where you're sort of very rowdy. Very. I have a football pitch right outside my window, and quite often I hear very high screams, and they're playing football. They're not doing
Hmm.
anything dangerous or anything, but they're just screaming, and they just become these very mad screams. And there is something there about the hormones that I think might go into that. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
But
Let's,
yeah,
yeah,
apart from the
just,
fashion,
yeah.
it's difficult to sum up
Hmm.
really. And I think the fashions they of course symbolize something. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's let these young folks just, go play their games, get into a little trouble, not too bad. It's just part of being a young person.
Yes, yes.
Um,
I mean, I
y-
should say that of course I really enjoy and I really like these different subcultures, and I love to look at all these fashions. But I am ambivalent towards them. I don't always like these young men, and I think my ambivalence is summed up in the last sentence of the book, which I'm not going to say what it is. So you have to read it
yes.
for yourself to see what
Yeah.
my verdict is.
That also made me laugh. I'm remembering the last word.
Ah, good.
This has been
Oh,
great. Thank you so much, Peter. Just one last question. You've touched on quite a few different topics in your last books. You explored tutor, fool, now dandies. Do you have any idea of what might be coming next for you?
um, yes, I have a few ideas of future books, and it's really too early to say if
Yeah.
anything will become anything. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I work at a museum at the moment, as we spoke about earlier. I
Mhm.
work at one of the most famous outdoor museums in Sweden called Kulturen, or the Museum
Mhm.
of Cultural History in Lund, in the south of Sweden. Very lovely town, a very nice museum. So that's my main work, my day job,
Yeah.
if you like. And I think I should just end by encourage you all, if you're passing through Sweden, if you're in Copenhagen and just want to cross the sea to see what Sweden is like, go to the Museum of Cultural History.
Absolutely. And you're also a parent, so that's another
Mm-hmm.
full-time job.
Yes, yes. I'm sitting here with toys and stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's been wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Audience, please buy the Dandy. It's available through our website, or you can come in and buy it in the store. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, and thank you all for coming, and yeah, it's been great. It's been an honor.
Wonderful. Well, have a great evening for you, Peter, and a great day for everyone else.